Hello, everyone. My name's Ione Butler, and welcome to this episode of the Uplifting Content Podcast. My guest today is Dolly Chugh. Dolly, how are you?
I'm wonderful. So nice to meet you.
Really lovely to meet you. Thank you for sending me in advance a copy of your book, because I was just saying I've been getting into it and really, your work is just brilliant and fascinating and so necessary. So before we dive into our conversation, would you mind just sharing with the audience a bit about who you are and the work that you're doing?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. And thank you for that nice introduction. So my name is Dolly Chugh, and professionally, I'm a professor at New York University at the business school there called the Stern School of Business, which means I teach MBA students courses about management and leadership. Research is a big part of my work as a professor, and what I'm interested in is what I call the psychology of good people. So people like you and me, and I'm sure your listeners and viewers who are in the world trying to look for good and be good, and just most people, in fact, say they care about being seen as a good person, however they define that. And yet, I know when I look at my own behavior, and I know as a social scientist, when I look at the behavior of all of us, we often fall short of what we would consider to be good behavior in someone else. You know, I cut someone off when I'm driving and kind of make excuses for doing that, or I mix up two students of the same race for each other, even though they don't look alike at all. You know, like two black men, one's a foot taller than the other, and I'm somehow confusing them. And these moments are moments where it's like, what's happening? And so that's what I study, are those moments of that are not specific to me. It seems like they're something we all struggle with. And so I'm interested in unconscious bias or unintentional forms of unethical behavior, or what I call the psychology of good people. And that's after almost 20 years of working on this topic, I decided to bring it all together in a book that took all of the interesting research out of these boring scholarly journals and brought it to broad audiences, to the rest of us, where we could use it. And then the really fun part of writing the book was also weaving together stories of real people with the research, so that it could really come alive. And that's what I've been up to.
It's pretty incredible. What
Thank
made you get
you.
into this? How was your journey into it?
Well, I think, academia is a second career for me. So I was in the corporate world for 11 years when I came out of university, and worked in investment banking and consulting. I have an MBA. Like, I was very much in the sort of do mode more than the reflect or analyze or understand mode. And then in my, I want to say it was my 30s, I think it was my early 30s, I went to an MBA reunion and had this epiphany, one of those moments of I should have been a professor, and like had never thought of that before, and was like, I might as well have thought I should be Madonna. Like, it just seemed equally preposterous. But eventually, as these things go, sometimes things start to fall into place. And so over the next couple of years, I actually did end up pivoting into getting a PhD, starting a PhD at the age of 32, 33. And then at that point, with all those years of doing under my belt, it was kind of like, okay, now if I were to look at that and step back from that and try to understand the world through the lens, the luxury and the lens of social sciences and research, what would I want to understand better? And a lot of it for me had to do with this idea of, why do I do the things I do? Why don't I do the things I should do? And those are, in essence, a lot of the central questions of social psychology, which is a field I ended up studying.
So, on that note, then, what makes a good person in your opinion? And because
Yeah,
you talk about the book is a lot about biases that we all have, subconscious ones. And if we've
right.
got, my thinking is, if we've got subconscious beliefs that have been programmed to do with our conditioning, our environment, does it make us a bad person that we subconsciously think one thing about a gender or a race, or is that
Yeah.
the fault of our programming and conditioning? Are we inherently bad? I don't think so. But
Right, right,
get your
right.
professional.
Absolutely. Well, the subtitle of my book, the book is called "The Person You Mean to Be," but the subtitle is "How Good People Fight Bias," and the subtitle is a little bit of a trick, uh, a trick question, if you will. Like by the time readers get to the end of the book, I think they realize that I kind of took them for a ride a little bit, because two things are true about that good people phrase. One is that I don't make any claim that I know what Ione's version of good person should be. Like, you decide what good person is for you, not me. And I decide for me, and my colleague at work is going to decide for himself. What I'm interested in is not telling anyone else what they should think a good person is. It's more like, whatever your definition is, what are the tools and strategies we can use to help you get closer to your own definition? It just so happens a lot of people's definition of good person is, don't be a racist, don't be a sexist, don't be a homophobe. Not everyone's definition, but a lot of people's. And that aligns well with the things I study. And so the book speaks to that. For people who that definition is important, it speaks to that. That's the first reason it's a little bit of a trick, is that I'm not telling you what good person is, you're telling yourself. But the second reason is that I make the argument in the book that we should let go of trying to be good people, that's in fact the problem, that I argue the path to being a better person begins with letting go of being a good person. And to that end, I offer some insights from the research about how we put ourselves in a very tight corner. Most of us, when we say, let's say, not a racist, not a sexist, not a homophobe, that's a tight corner with no window, where we expect zero bias and zero mistakes. And the reality, what we can tell you from all the empirical research that's been done, is that none of us are completely bias-free. None of us are completely mistake-free. And so if we're in this tight corner where that's the only way to call yourself a good person, and we care about being a good person, then when we do make a mistake, we actually go into like super red zone defensiveness, because we don't want to acknowledge the mistake, because that threatens an identity we care about, a good person identity. And so we don't grow from the mistakes. And so what I argue in the book is, let's let go of being good people and instead embrace being goodish people. Goodish people are people who are a work in progress. And I think it's actually a higher standard than being a good person. A good person's like an either or. Either I am a good person or I'm not. And if you put people in that corner, they're going to always say they are and find a way to convince themselves of it. Whereas goodish person is, I'm striving to be whatever I call good person. But when I do make mistakes, I'm going to reflect on it, and I'm going to learn from it, and I'm going to hear the people telling me that I misstepped and get better the next time. So goodish is better than good, I've been arguing.
I like that a lot. And before you thoroughly explained that, my sort of hesitation to my resistance to that was, when you tell people that it's better to be goodish than good, then it justifies them for behaving in whatever ways. But you're not saying.
Yes.
You're saying,
no, thank you.
It just, you keep working on being better. And it's a really great point that you're right. If we say I'm a good person, we've got all these inherent biases that we're not even aware of. So it's kind of impossible. And who is the ultimate? Dalai Lama, Jesus, who person? And not many people in this day and age can be that. So stop giving us.
That's right.
No, I like
that's right. No, that's so insightful of you, because I have done some interviews where people have left with that impression, the one that you didn't leave with. And that's exactly the wrong direction. I'm saying good is the cop-out, not goodish is the cop-out.
I like it a lot. So, you were saying about those, most people, as a good person, they see it as being, not racist, not homophobic, not sexist, these things. But there are, I'm just going to be just saying what I feel there. I could be off the mark.
Good.
But there are people that are causing a lot of problems in the world who have these ideas that certain races are superior and certain genders are superior and that certain minorities shouldn't be in the country. And they have all of these beliefs which we can obviously assume are based on biases because they're not the truth. And how do we show these people that this is just kind of wrong?
Right. I mean,
having this discussion
I hear you.
about this discussion about, everyone's allowed their opinion. And I'm like, yes, we are allowed your opinion. Yes, choose whichever political side you want to vote. Yeah, have your opinion. But when you are like preaching hate, or you you deserve better than someone else because of the color of your skin. At some point, we have to just say no, but that doesn't always.
Yes.
How do we get to these people?
Yeah. And it's certainly timely, your question. So I have a what will I think be a less satisfying answer, and I think I have what will be a more satisfying answer. So
I'll take them.
okay, I'll give you both. I think the more satisfying answer is that we have more ability to influence those people than we think, but we don't always feel the influence. So, for example, one thing that studies show, this is research from others that I've summarized in the book, is that when someone says something hateful, or when someone says a joke that's hurtful, and we have that moment of, should we say anything or shouldn't we, or should we stand up to this person? Those moments that we've, I think, all experienced. And often wondered if we handled right. I share some of my own mortifying moments in the book. What the studies say is that when you say something and you get a negative response from the party you've said it to, and you'd like, oh, that didn't have any effect. What studies show is that there is a latent effect that we're not always privy to. So even if the person lashes out or is defensiveness or says, you can't take a joke, you have no sense of humor, all those responses that suggest you had no impact, on average, what studies show is there is a lessening of whatever the stupid behavior was down the road from that person. It's just out of view of you, the person who confronted them. So that's I think, when I read that research, I was incredibly gratified that sometimes we think we're just beating our heads against the wall, and there is more possibility than we think. But I think the answer that may or may not be as satisfying is that in my research and in my book, what I try to tackle is, let's say I gave you a magic wand and you could fix exactly what you just described in your question. All of the people with the very blatant supremacist type of views, and we could fix it. I argue that we still have very significant problems, and that the problems that are left are those with us. And I'm being very deliberate in pointing at us in saying that we don't carry those hateful views, and yet I think in ways we don't intend, we are still unintentionally creating some harm in the world. And that's where my book hopes to be useful. So what are the ways in which, for example, I don't realize how my unconscious biases are affecting how I teach? So when I had a teaching assistant track my class discussions, so I teach classes where students, there's 60 students in a room, there's a lot of hands up at any given moment. Discussion and debate is a big part of our class. Part of their grade is based on that. And so I have to make decisions about who to call on and how long to let them talk and that kind of thing. So I had a teaching assistant once track that, and I was pretty upset to learn that I was disproportionately calling on men over women, that I was disproportionately interrupting women versus men, and that all these egalitarian feminist views, and I'm a mother of 2 daughters who I'm trying to raise as feminists, all these things that I espouse in very explicit ways were not what was leaking into my actual behavior when I am unintentionally letting my unconscious gender biases out. So that's one example of ways in which I'm not the one going around saying women should stay in the kitchen, just the opposite. And yet I'm still potentially contributing to these issues. So the less satisfying answer to your question is, maybe some of our attention needs to be reserved for ourselves.
I see what you're saying. And I think that's the key point. Because again, I was worried that you were thinking that if we could wave the magic wand, that getting rid of the supremely sort of anti people is not beneficial. But surely having less outwardly hateful people is better than you with your interrupting women in class. But
Absolutely.
Right. It's also, let's not constantly make it about them and others, and also turn the attention back on ourselves because we're doing it. That's brilliant. And I like,
we can do both.
Pardon?
Apologies for interrupting. I was just saying we could do both. In agreement with you.
It's because I'm a
Yes.
female, isn't it?
Probably, actually. I apologize.
Dolly, how dare you?
Busted.
I really liked your point in the beginning as well, about just planting those seeds. Here's the thing that stresses me out. Like, I will always stand up to bullies, and I've always said that to people. I've noticed that whenever I stand up to bullies, they always kind of back off me and leave me alone and have a little bit more respect. And so bullies only like to bully people that they can get away with bullying. Bullies don't bully people that don't put up with the bullying. It's just
interesting. Makes sense.
I'm sure not everyone feels as confident as I am, and people are in different situations. But that idea of that you said of just calling people out, they might react in whatever way, but just calling them out, I think that's great. And then they kind of they'll go away with that, and it might have some impact. But what I'm realizing is, and this is, the whole thing that happened with Trump, is racism is not an acceptable thing in our society. Now, it's this thing where being a racist is not okay. And that's kind of been what's been growing for the last however many years. And then Trump comes along and says all these outrageous things. And it gives a lot of people the permission to speak their truth, which is about how they feel. And so as much as I can call someone out and say, that's a really offensive thing. Like my mum will say outlandish things about certain people's driving based on their race. And I'm like, what is their race? Stop this now. And I don't think she's a bad person, but she'll say this outrageous stuff. And I'm like, that's not okay. We can call them out. And then they might shut up because they know that in society, it's not acceptable to kind of say these things. But is it really changing their beliefs about...
Right.
And how do we...
Well, it's a great question, but here's the thing, and this was, again, some of the research I just loved learning about and sharing with readers in my book, is that we don't have to change their beliefs. I'm not saying if we knew how, we should, but what we need to change are norms. And so I share something called the 20-60-20 rule, which I learned from a former consulting colleague in my first career, named Susan Lucia Annunzio. And so the 20-60-20 rule is, she would do like global corporate change type of initiatives in companies. So it's like, we need to be more customer centered, those kinds of things, business initiatives. And what she would tell her clients is 20% of the people are going to be like so excited, like, oh my God, we're going to be more customer centered. I can't wait. This is like, I've been waiting for this. I always thought we should do it. Just stay out of their way. They're going to lead the way for everyone else. 20%, another 20% of the people, and the numbers don't matter. It just means like another portion of the people are never coming with you. They will never buy into this. And they are what she would call comfortably miserable the way things are. They are going to be loud, and they're going to, in ways both subtle and not so subtle, try to sabotage this change effort. And then there's going to be 60% in the middle who really are not super engaged on this particular issue. I'm not saying they're not good employees, but on this particular issue of customer engagement, this isn't the thing they're thinking a lot about. And so they don't have a strong opinion, and they are going to see where the winds blow. They're going to see what the norms are, and the first 20 might pull them their way, or the other 20 might pull them their way. And what we know is they can be pulled one way or another. And so we don't have to change their beliefs to get their behavior and buy-in on this issue of, let's say, customer engagement. Now, if we take the 20-60-20 rule out of the corporate world and we bring it into this kind of work, and we imagine that, for example, the example you just gave, the use of stereotypes in assessing and judging other people's behavior, and whether or not it's okay to vocalize that without any data to support it, is... some people are just going to do that forever. Even when I confront them, even if I use different strategies of confronting them, some people are going to quickly respond to feedback like, "Ooh, my bad, you're right. I didn't even realize what I was doing. Thank you for letting me know. Like, I'm embarrassed, but I'm going to do better." And then everyone else in the middle, we have a chance to show them the possibilities. And so what we do there is we don't worry about changing underlying attitudes. We worry about changing their beliefs about what is okay and acceptable by others. And there's lots of ways we do this. We do it through our leaders. We do it through our entertainment. We do it through who our influencers are in our immediate local environment or corporate environment or work or neighborhood. All of these things shape our understanding of what is okay. You go to a wedding, the DJ starts playing the music, nobody's on the dance floor until one person or one couple goes out there, and then all of a sudden the dance floor is full. It happens every time. All you need is someone to start pushing the norms in one direction, and others will follow.
I like that. I like that. So I'd love to hear from you some tips on how we can be more aware and shift our biases. So you did that study when you learned that you were interrupting people. Like, how do we change that? Has it got any better? Did you give yourself the study recently?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's gotten better. It took me honestly a few weeks to really adjust to that reality that I really was doing that. But now, for example, I try not to call on 3 men in a row, because just statistically, if I'm calling on 3 men in a row, I probably am missing female hands. I'm probably going right over them with my eyes. So little rules of thumb like that are useful to me. What we know is that debiasing ourselves, like literally removing or changing an unconscious bias, is pretty hard to do. But what's much easier to do is create systems and processes that will override the bias. So like what I just gave you was a very sort of, small example in my little world of something I've done. But, for example, there's a famous study of orchestras reducing their tendency to hire male musicians exactly when they put a curtain.
I read about that.
That's right. That's right. And also putting a carpet on the floor so they couldn't tell whether the shoes were high heels or not, or asking people to walk out barefoot. And I forget the immediate statistic, but it was something like they increased the representation of women by, and I'm making up the number, but something like 25%, just with this very simple system or process change. And so what I share in the book are examples of, for example, an executive at Google named Rick Clow, someone who really saw himself as someone who was very good at promoting women and hiring women and really, quote unquote, one of the good guys. And then he took this measure of unconscious bias called the IAT, or the implicit association test. It's free, it's anonymous, it's online.
IAT, he got to write that down. I want to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the website is implicit.harvard.edu.
Okay, I'm going to write that down.
And he was surprised to get, finding a result that showed he had unconscious gender bias that was showing men in leadership roles versus women and things like that. And it was like, that wasn't what I thought. And he was a little resistant to this finding, but then he started going through his social media, and he's a big influencer on social media. He's in Silicon Valley and really does do a lot to connect people and connect people with a capital in his field. And he realized that only 20% of the people he was connected to on LinkedIn and Twitter and those kinds of media were women. And he was like, whoa, that seems surprising. And so he actively, now this is an example of using a system to override the bias, he started actively adding more women to his LinkedIn connections and his Twitter follows. And he, by doing that, was able to hear a broader perspective than he was before. So, for example, he says, and this was before the Me Too movement became a national dialogue that I interviewed him, it was before that. He said, when you don't follow that many women on Twitter, every now and then you hear a case of sexual harassment or a story about it, an anecdote. And he says, truthfully, they don't stand out. When you're following almost 50% women, you start realizing you're hearing these stories almost daily. Somebody's experiencing something. And so he realized that all the ways, the lens through which he was viewing the world was being kind of reinforcing unconscious biases that he didn't even realize. But by putting a system in place where he had access to more voices, he was able to begin shifting his understanding.
That's fantastic. And so that in a way we should all kind of look at that, like if we've only got just sort of one demographic of friends and just sort of having people of varying ages, more open genders, mix of genders and races and stuff like that. And interestingly, I don't know how you feel about this, people with like opposite opinions, belief systems too. I don't know. I am a little bit resistant to hearing certain things because I react so much against it. But it is, I think, important to understand what people are thinking and where they're coming from.
I think that's right. So maybe let's break up those two things. So one was people with different experiences and backgrounds, and then two was people with different views. So if we start with experience and backgrounds, absolutely. And it could be everything from your friend circle, but it could also be one of the things I suggest is to do an audit of whatever media you consume most actively. So some people are really into podcasts, or other people are in TED Talks, or people are into books or TV shows or movies or music, whatever it is, pick the thing. Most people have one or more of those. And then look at the last 5 to 10 that you consumed or bought or attended. What voices were represented? The creator, how similar is the background of that creator to your own background? How similar, if you look at, like, let's say the last 10 movies you attended, or the last 10 music songs you bought, how similar are their identities to each other? And so you can increase your exposure to different people with different backgrounds than yours and from each other. It's hard to go make new friends, honestly. It's not the easiest thing to do, and it depends on a lot of things, and you also don't want to sort of tokenize friendships in any kind of way. But
I'm looking for an Asian friend. Anybody?
Yeah, anybody. You could learn a lot about the Asian experience just by committing to reading 5 books by 5 different Asian authors and getting 5 different Asian perspectives. So I think there's very actionable things all of us can do, like starting today on that front. Regarding different views, that's an interesting one. And certainly I am supportive of us all trying to understand each other better. That there's no downside to that, I think. And the more we can do to humanize each other, the better. That said, I'm wary in this day and age of efforts that are asking us to be more civil and to be less divisive and to all get in the same room and talk. I think there's certain views that are hateful enough that there is a benefit to trying, if you have the emotional stamina for it, to trying to understand how that person developed that view. But it's also tremendously costly to the psyche. And it's particularly costly if you're from a group that is targeted by that view. Right. And some of these calls for us to be less divisive, I think, are putting the burden and the work on the people who are targeted to be in the room, literally or figuratively. And I'm not in support of that at all. I think, I don't think there's anything to be gained by that kind of conversation.
We did a video once about this African-American man called Daryl Davis, who befriended a bunch of people from the KKK. And because of his friendship with them, a lot of them ended up leaving. Now, I'm not quite sure how he did it. But I mean, he talked about, he would challenge their beliefs, not in an aggressive, argumentative way, but just, calmly and rationally. And eventually that kind of chipped away at their beliefs. So I was like, right, brilliant. I'm going to start having these conversations with people. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be open. And after the election, I was traveling and staying with some family friends who had voted for Trump. And I was like, let me try and understand how and why they voted the way they do, because I want to get to understand. And it was just, it was interesting because it ended up becoming this whole thing, like telling me all these like outrageous stories, which obviously at the time we didn't know how much fake news was coming out on Facebook. All these outlandish things. And I was like, in my mind, like, where is this information coming from? It just sounds ridiculous. And now we kind of know what it was.
Now we know.
The point I had to stop having the conversation was, he started talking about how millennials are awful and millennials don't care about anyone and blah, blah, blah. And I was just, as a millennial, I was like, where is this coming from? What's your evidence? I'm surrounded by hundreds of millennials that are doing incredible things for people.
Right.
What's your experience? And then he kind of listed a bunch of mutual people that we know, none of which were millennials. And then the final was when he said, some millennial messaged me on Facebook and she told me that she doesn't like millennials either. And I was like, that doesn't give you the right to say millennials suck. And so if you can't see that like your opinion isn't based on any type of foundation, the moral of the story is I wasn't strong enough
right
to try and understand. I just had to leave.
God bless you.
So it's like, I can't do it. I want to understand you, but it's just so ludicrous. Like you're quoting all these like outrageous articles, and your justification for millennials sucking is one random girl on Facebook who's a millennial told you millennials suck. that's not enough.
Yes, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. Both stories about you and Daryl. It reminds me. I read a book. I think the book that affected me most that I read last year was a new book by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Eli Saslow. I believe it's
Okay.
spelled Saslow, and
Hmm.
it was called Rising Out of Hatred. And it's the true story of Derek Black, who's a his godfather is David Duke. His father created Stormfront, the white nationalist website that's very popular. And Derek, who is a millennial, it was considered to be the successor to taking over Stormfront and taking over the white. I can't remember if it was nationalist or supremacist movement, but one of the two. And he was literally homeschooled by his family into these beliefs and into this leadership role. He had a very huge following for a radio program he did. And then he went to college. And what Saslow does in his book is chronicle what happened at college and how it led to a complete reversal in his views, where he's now an active anti-racist. And what's sort of heartbreaking in the book is what's heartwarming is this unbelievable impact his classmates and friends had, and their
Right.
willingness, just as an example you gave about, I believe Daryl Davis, you said his name was, in the same way how his friends just kept persisting. It kind of just
Chipped away
like
at those
chipped
beliefs.
away. Thank
Mm.
you. Exactly. Chipped away. But what's heartbreaking about it is that his parents really loved him. I mean, it's sort of eye-opening to see how you can be kind of, I use this term realizing it's sort of a weird term to use, but like really good parents in
Mm.
a really hateful ideology, but like very
Mm.
loving, very supportive, like all the things that we want to be to our children, they were to him, but in service of something pretty hateful. And
Mm.
so it's a fascinating page turner book. If you, and it's thoroughly researched. And if I had seen this as a movie or read it as fiction, I would have said it was the most preposterous thing I'd ever read, and yet it's all true. So there's that. I'll throw a little bit of research onto this too that's kind of relevant. What another argument for you to not have to be in the room defending millennials or defending women or defending people of color or any group, and I don't know how you self-identify, but any group you might self-identify with, is that it turns out when we confront people about issues like that, when we are the one directly affected, we have less impact than if someone outside of our group does it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Mm.
let me just be concrete about it. Like if you said you identify as a millennial, if you try to defend millennial to your family friend versus if a non-millennial tries to defend millennial to your family friend, what the research would suggest is the non-millennial will actually have more influence and be more persuasive than you will. You
Mm.
will be perceived, ironically, as whiny and as sort of playing the millennial card. The
Mm.
studies that have been done aren't actually about millennials, they're about race and they're about gender, and they've looked at ways in which, for example, a boss, if a black boss hires a black employee or promotes a black employee versus if a white boss hires a black employee, the white boss, there's sort of no impact positively or negatively on how they're seen by others, whereas the black boss is perceived negatively. Or the
Wow.
same thing is true, yeah, the same thing is true when you challenge a joke, as let's say a sexist joke. If a woman challenges the joke, she is not taken as seriously as if a man challenges a sexist joke. And so that line of research with its multiple studies suggests that there's the people who should be in that uncomfortable room don't necessarily have to be the people who are the targets. The rest of us have a role to play, the ones who aren't directly affected,
That's
which is
huge.
great news. Isn't that great
Yeah.
news? Because it's so many of us are feeling helpless, right?
Hmm.
We're watching people from groups we care about but we're not part of be maligned, and we feel helpless on the sidelines. This is an opportunity to realize that we have what I call ordinary privilege. It's an ordinary part of our identity we don't think about much, but it's the part of our identity that isn't getting maligned is probably where we actually have more
Have the
influence
most
than we
impact.
realize. Yeah.
That's fantastic, because I interviewed a woman. I'm working on a book right now, and I interviewed an amazing woman who was falsely imprisoned for setting fire to a trailer and killing her son.
Oh
And she
gosh.
was in jail for years, and finally got out. And I mean, it's just heartbreaking, just the lengths that she had to go to prove her innocence, and just how awful the case was and what they did, and it completely corrupt and disgusting.
Yeah.
And I asked her, like, what is the lesson that you want us to take away from the story, and what should we do? And she was like, care about people that are falsely imprisoned. Like, we wait until it's us before we
Right.
start to defend and stand up for these things. And
That's
you're
right.
saying, like, you don't have to be Black to defend people that are being discriminated against.
Yep.
You don't have to just only care about a cause when it's happening to you. Get
That's right.
behind these things. We all have the power to stand up for the things that we disagree with. I think it's an amazing Martin Luther King quote. We become like, the world becomes something about becoming awful when we don't stand up for what we believe in, or something.
Yes.
Butchering.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
appalling silence of good people, I think, is part of
Yes.
one of his quotes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, yeah, I that resonates so much with me. And I think if there is a silver lining to the ascendance of Trump, it is that so many people now are invested in issues that don't affect them directly.
Right.
And so that's where it's like, okay, now you are invested. Now what do you do? And that's where I think we need tools and strategies. And that's what I tried to capture in the book is, okay, now you're invested, but you're like, but I'm helpless. What do I do? No, you're not helpless. There are things you can do.
And this is like overrunning, but I'm loving this conversation. Oh, and
Okay.
also, everyone, Dolly has offered to give away 2 copies of the book. We'll have the sign up below. So thank you for that. But what I always say
Oh,
is,
yes.
if you're fascinated by this book, get it, buy it, and then also apply to win, and then you can give it to somebody. Yeah, because it is a really fantastic book. And then I just got so excited, I went off the rails a bit. You were saying, oh gosh, what were you just?
Okay. I was just saying,
Yeah, the tools.
people are invested, the tools, strategies.
So,
Yeah.
and can you just tell us some of those? Because that's the thing that I always struggle with. Like, I do believe people want to help. They do want to do good. They watch the news and they're disheartened by everything. But people want to help, but they don't always know how. What do you suggest?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have suggestions that range from sort of quick to more, systemic and longer term. But let me offer one quick one. And I actually, early in the book, I offer a story about Sarah Weeks and Geeta Varadarajan. And these are 2 writers who were writing a book together for the first time. And Sarah's written 30 books and is pretty well known as an author, and Geeta was a first-time author. So Sarah was introducing her to agents and other people in the field, and what she found herself doing is not saying Geeta's full name. She would say Geeta, but not Varadarajan, because it's a long, multi-syllable name that she didn't know how to pronounce. And so as they were writing the book, Geeta wrote a character in the story that they were writing who had immigrated from India to the US, and nobody was trying to say his name. He'd been there for a year and nobody had tried to say his name. And so Sarah read this in the manuscript and was like, just, to understand the motivation of the characters, can you tell me, why don't you think anyone's trying to say his name? She asked, and Geeta didn't miss a beat. She said, arrogance. And Sarah was like, whoa, like that means she thinks I'm arrogant because I've never said her name. And so she fesses up that she's never said her name because she doesn't know how and she doesn't want to mess it up and she's embarrassed and all this stuff. And it breaks open this whole conversation about how we can all try to learn how to say the names of the people in our lives and our workplaces and in our neighborhoods. And I can tell you that there was a time where I would avoid calling on students in class if I didn't know how to say their name, because I didn't want to embarrass them and I didn't want to embarrass myself. But if you think about, if we're trying to build inclusive communities, if we're trying to build inclusive workplaces, if we're not saying people's names, or if we're avoiding talking to them because we don't know how to say their name, that's almost perfectly lining up with what you would do if you were being exclusive instead of inclusive. The chances are the people whose names you don't know how to say are people who have a background somewhat different than yours. And those are exactly the people that we should be including more, and instead we are, out of our own discomfort, excluding them more. So first thing we can all start to do is pick 3 names you don't know how to say and ask those people, or don't burden them by asking them more than once. Use the internet and the tools. You can Google how to pronounce and put in any name, and you will get an audio file. This has never failed me. You'll get an audio file where you can hear someone say the name. Learn how to say their name. Learn how to say it in a way that doesn't have to be Meryl Streep perfect with its pronunciation. I can't do accents, as this New Jersey American accent's all I got. But we can learn like what letters are silent or what syllables are stressed versus the less stressed syllable. That level we can do instead of shortening people's names, instead of avoiding saying their names, instead of nicknaming people. These are ways in which we can truly honor what was probably the most important and first decision someone in their family made about them.
Yes.
So that's something that we can start with right away.
Yeah.
And then there's more systemic, longer term things we can do. We can start to think about, let's say in the workplace, we can start to think about what are we basing our hiring decisions on, and what are our promotion decisions based on. Cultural fit is something that gets talked about a lot in the corporate world. But what studies, yeah, that's the right question, is what does it mean? And it turns out that it inadvertently has ended up meaning, according to some studies, like by sociologist Lauren Rivera, is that it means we have shared hobbies and shared alma maters with the person, which is not in any way the real intention behind the importance of cultural fit. Cultural fit, I think, is intended to mean like, that we share a passion for making the customer happy, or we share a passion for innovation and new ideas.
So you're saying that in certain companies, they're talking about cultural fit, and then it's becoming very exclusive because we're not the same culture, and then it becomes problematic.
Yeah, I mean, culture, I think they mean organizational culture when they talk about that. They don't mean ethnic culture. But the manifestation of it, if the way you screen for cultural fit is just how does the vibe feel in the interview, and did we have a lot to talk about? Well, it turns out if you have a shared passion for home brewing or marathon running, or you both went to the same school, or you were in the same athletic program, then yeah, you're gonna have a lot to talk about, during those sort of like filler times in an interview. And so it will feel like we have a great fit here, as opposed to someone with whom you don't have any of those natural conversation points. So more systemic changes that take longer are, let's really look at what criteria are we using. Let's look at the last 5 people we interviewed, the last 5 people we promoted, the last 5 people who left our company. Let's see what the patterns are.
And just before we wrap up, but when we were having a little chat before, and you had said that one of the things that you teach about in school, that you teach about, is, what was the word that you called it when you sort of create the job that you want?
Oh, job crafting.
Yeah. Job crafting. Dolly had been having a little Google and checking out uplifting content on what I'm doing, and said that I'm an example of someone that has job crafted. And I just think that that's a fantastic term, and because I have sort of created a life or work around the things, set it up the way that I want it to be. And it's so possible. I think most people just think I have to go to school and then get a job. And I'm like,
that's right.
Actually, way different, way more that you can do than just that.
Right. Absolutely, yes. Amy Wisniewski is the Yale professor who has done the most robust work on job crafting. And the key with job crafting is a little different than follow your passion or that sort of mantra. This is more about, look at ways in which the market or your organization, if you're employed by a company or a nonprofit, look at their needs, look at your skills, look at your relationships, and negotiate your way to meeting their needs while meeting yours. So it's sort of in the nomenclature of negotiation, it's a win-win. Yeah. And she has like, I think there's a some online articles you can look up where she offers step-by-step processes for thinking about how you could job craft. And the idea is not that, well, I'm passionate about yoga, and even though yoga has nothing to do with my employer's needs, I'm just going to do a lot of yoga. It's how could yoga actually support? What are the ways in which you could bring both of those together?
That's brilliant, because I'm not very good at being employed, for example. So I've
Okay.
created an environment for myself. But I like what you said.
Yes.
I interviewed someone previously, and they'd mentioned this term, an intrapreneur, which is someone who, not
Yes.
everyone's an entrepreneur. Not everyone is going to go and start their own business and be their
That's
own boss. It
right.
doesn't work for everyone. So for people who are in jobs, it's how do
Yep.
you? Yeah, I like that you bring in that idea together. How can you how can you be fulfilled in your job? Because surely most companies would want their employees to feel fulfilled and be working at their best and whatever. And
Yes.
so they might not understand this or know about this, but it's a great
Yes.
way to take an offer. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. I love that connection with entrepreneurship. Yeah, the whole idea with job crafting is that you are still delivering at a very high level, perhaps even a higher level to your employer. That's the
Yeah.
idea.
Fabulous. Dolly, this has been really fantastic. Thank you so much
Oh,
for your
thank you.
time. I absolutely love the book. Please check it out. How to be, what's the title again? Make sure I get it right.
The person you mean to be, how good people fight bias.
I like it. I was getting it.
And thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate you and all you're doing with your work. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Guys, I'll be back next week with another interview. Take care, and you'll hear from me soon. Bye.